Chapter 26, How to Not Inspire People. We tend to focus on a lot of toxic leadership, the aggressive, bullying, micromanaging types. The thing is, not every form of toxicity is the same. The managers who don't motivate or challenge their employees, these leaders often get overlooked because they're not as overtly damaging. But make no mistake, uninspired leadership can be just as harmful, if not more so in the long run. Think about it. How many times have you worked under a boss who didn't seem to care about innovation or change? Maybe they just maintained the status quo, managing the day-to-day, but offering no vision for the future. That kind of leadership slowly sucks the energy out of teams and organizations. It drains the collective power of the team and enforces a culture of competition, one that is devoid of teamwork and unity. These employers are often focused on results. How they get those results, well, that is the uninspiring part. And what are the results? Typically it's mediocrity, but they don't tend to see it that way. But not only do they lack vision, they aren't always clear on what the actual goals of the company are. If you were to ask them, I'm sure they'd draw a blank. History shows us that as much as organizations tout their core goals and values, few people actually know them. The most astonishing thing of it all is usually the people in the very important roles who seem especially clueless as to what they actually are. From the Hyman brand, I'm JD Hyman. As a Black man living here in America, I am living proof that while all men were created equal, not all men are equal. We're here to dig into the American political system, explore and unearth experiences from the human condition, and be a catalyst for some hard conversations that need to be had. No matter what brought you here, I'm glad you came. Once again, my name is JD, and this is the Hyman Podcast. Part 1. The Assistant or Louboutins. Leadership is more than just a title. It's more than being in charge of a team, signing off on projects, or delegating tasks. True leadership is about inspiring others to be their best selves, to push the limits, to aim for better and greater things, to reach higher places. Effective leaders know how to tap into the potential of their team, energizing them to work toward a collective vision. So what sets an inspiring leader apart from an ineffective one?
I have a lot of experience in this subject, 20 years worth of experience doing training, coaching, and culture work for companies. And almost every call I get on is somebody that starts the call with, I love my manager and company, but. And as soon as I hear the word but, I say everything before the but is BS. So tell me what you don't like about your company and what you don't like about your manager. And then it leads to a 50-minute session with some ideas and everything of how to deal with that.
You're hearing from John Waid. John is the founder and CEO of Corporate Culture Consulting, a firm that specializes in aligning an organization's culture with its strategic goals. John has worked in sales and marketing at Pfizer, PepsiCo, Nestle, and Chateau Saint Michelle Winery. During these experiences, he developed a heightened awareness of the indispensable role people's attitudes play in implementing effective processes and procedures. This interest led him to study behavior in corporate settings and working as a behavior consultant. Because behaviors don't exist in a vacuum, John examined and analyzed the effects of corporate culture on behavior and found his real purpose in life as a pioneering expert on that subject. He understands the direct link between a company's team and culture and its performance. As a globally recognized expert on corporate culture, he leads companies to clearly define their values and then builds positive and purposeful behaviors focused on results. He is a passionate advocate for developing business leaders who can attract superior talent and then retain that talent. John's background in marketing and sales is evident in his focus on using culture to grow businesses and their profits. He does this by teaching managers how to value their talent in ways that get desired results. John is an author, speaker, sales, service, and leadership facilitator and thought leader in the area of corporate culture and its positive impact on people and companies. He was born of U.S. parents in Mexico City, has lived in 5 countries, and speaks fluent Spanish, Portuguese, and English. He is the author of the sales culture book, Reinventing Ralph, a keynote speaker on leadership and culture, a blogger, a soccer fan, wine enthusiast, and a proud dad. He currently makes his home in Atlanta, Georgia. So let's get back on topic. Intimidation seems to be the hallmark of any toxic manager. They use it like a Swiss Army knife. It can do just about anything. Sometimes they remind me of those black market surgeons, cutting away at just enough of the person to keep them alive. One day I was having an issue with something at work, and the people who were capable of helping me were very limited. Our current hospital administrator was not among them, but her predecessor was. Ron was the hospital administrator at the hospital I worked at since before I started working there, and had recently moved to another facility, which is why we inherited the woman who will yet to be named. Ron was very familiar with our facility, and I knew he was the perfect person who could help me with my problem. So I reached out to him, and I was right. The problem was solved, or so I thought. A day or so later, I was approached by the hospital administrator who asked me, "Did you call Ron?" "Yes," I replied. "You shouldn't have done that," she snapped. "Excuse me?" Because I was confused, because it sounded like she was telling me who I could and couldn't talk to. "I should have been the one to make that call," she yelled. And it wasn't like I was selling state secrets, she just wanted that much control. But toxic managers don't exist in a vacuum, as we've mentioned. What about the people who stay? The ones who are either too afraid to leave, or the ones that fall for the "I'm your friend" charade? I was once privy to a conversation in which the hospital administrator and Jared, the assistant hospital administrator, were discussing a situation in which one employee had attacked another. Even though there was video evidence of the attack, they decided that the employee who was attacked provoked it. So apparently that made it okay. But what about the employee that was attacked, our very own clinical director? But that wouldn't be the first time something like that would happen. There was another time when the facility handyman got an attitude with me. He was notorious for sending disparaging emails, but I'm assuming he was used to sending emails to first graders or people who didn't have the wherewithal to call him to the mat. One day, as he was passing by my office, I asked him why he thought it was okay to send emails like that, and you would have thought I cursed out his mom. It was clear he didn't like me, and he showed it every chance he got, going so far to even try and circumvent the purchasing process like Her Royal Majesty was the end-all be-all. Anyways, I told the hospital administrator about the incident, and you know what she said to me? "Well, JD, you can be a bully." To this day, I still laugh at that, for her having to utter those words. Well, she didn't think I was very funny. She then said, "And I know the horrible things that you say about Karen." Karen was her executive assistant, who oftentimes referred to this administrator as an explicative that we will not be repeating today. But she had developed a loyalty to her boss that was born out of fear. She had worked at the hospital long before any of us, and as far as I know, she'll work there clear up until noon the day of her funeral. Karen is a 60-something going on 80-something-year-old woman who wakes up at 4 a.m. every morning and makes her way to work in an effort to beat the non-existent traffic at that hour. The woman smokes like a California wildfire on an arid day in Los Angeles County and is showing no signs of slowing down, even though she has a cough that can eclipse the sound of a fully powered jet engine. She is best known for her close-cropped haircut, gaudy necklaces, stylish outerwear, and what can only be described as sky-high stilettos. Remember that last bit, it'll come back in a later episode. Anyways, Karen at one point hated her boss's guts, but she learned how to play the game. She learned that if she just conformed, if she moved without stepping on toes, if she went along with the insolence and the intolerance of the people who spoke up, she would find herself out of the reach of the talons of a monster.
When the most awkward question that I ask them is, what are your values? And very few of them can tell me what their values are. So if they don't have known lived values, then everybody's behaving however they want. And if everyone's behaving however they want, then that's where you get bullying, toxicity, lack of empowerment, et cetera, et cetera.
People often claim to like their job. Some even claim to love their job. But how can you like or love your job when you're afraid for it? When the trauma of going to work eclipses all the good you can do, it stands to reason that you don't belong there anymore. More on this after the break. Part 2, Resistencia Noxia. So how do companies manage to make the most of their workforce without compromising on their values?
So what would a good company look like? It would have clear values that everybody knows and everybody lives. And I recommend 3. One that's operational, one that's growth, and one that's aspirational. Southwest Airlines has 3. Warrior spirit, servant heart, fun loving. Everybody knows them, everybody lives them. In a 30-year period from the 1960s to the 1990s, they had a return on investment of, if you had invested $10,000, you would have gotten $12 million back. The largest gain in shareholder equity in the history of recording up to then. And it's a low-cost airline. So how do you do that? So bad, no culture or no defined culture, because everybody has a culture. Most of them are full of greed and other values that aren't good values.
It would stand to reason that a person who falls in line is often safe from the effects of a toxic manager, but there are so many examples where that's hardly the case. There are typically 2 types of managers, or at least there are according to people like Simon Sinek and Adam Grant. Those who serve others, meaning their workforce, and those who expect others to serve them, again, referring to their workforce. The latter typically accomplish this by inspiring their subordinates, gaining buy-in. The latter, they use common yet less conventional tactics such as fear and bullying, and they all set out to accomplish a singular goal. I think for the most part, most managers start off the same. They are given a task and they are expected to accomplish that task through whatever means they have available to them. This, in effect, breeds a type of competition, which I believe is the bedrock of managerial etiquette. Trying to attain that singular goal and going after it, that's what separates the good from the great and the bad from the worse. It's like they say, the road to hell was paved with good intentions, and I think that's true when it comes to toxic managers. They didn't start out that way, but maybe they never had the training, or maybe they never learned to be better. And we'll discuss that in a future episode. For me, personally, I have been trained by some of the best and some of the worst. And despite the type of manager I had at the time, there was always more for me to learn. For example, the divisional president at my former company was a very personable man. You could talk to him about just about anything. He wasn't this boastful person with a holier-than-thou attitude. He wasn't full of himself. He wasn't prideful. He was just who he was. And I noticed that people took notice of that, and they sought his approval when I think all he wanted was for people to just be themselves. You can tell when someone isn't being genuine, and if you catch it early enough, you can usually save yourself a lot of heartache. When I worked for the Ohio Department of Education, my boss, Kalinda, was one of those people. You just gravitate towards their ability to put you at ease. They care about the work, but more than that, they care about you and your potential. People like Kalinda and my former company's divisional president I spoke of, they don't abrogate their responsibilities, but at the same time, they also have expectations. The problem doesn't arise until it comes to the actual part of managing the people, knowing what they can and can't do, challenging them to be better versions of themselves. I remember once my former divisional CFO and divisional president had given me a very complicated task. It was one of those tasks where you have to remember everything you've ever learned in order to pull it off. And when it was done, the divisional president made some comments and wanted some updates. He asked, "How long before you can turn this around?" In my mind, I was thinking another month, but instead I said, 1 week. I thought I was being pretty generous, even though I thought that wouldn't be nearly enough time. But what he said next shook me to my core. I was thinking 2 days. My heart sank deep into the recesses of my chest. 2 days? How was I going to pull this off in 2 days? I was silently freaking out, and after the call, my divisional CFO called me almost immediately. He saw I was visibly rattled. "Take a breath," he said. "Let's look at this rationally," he said. Music to my ears. Anyone who knows me knows that rationale and reason and logic are how I solve just about every problem placed before me. "Let's look at what the ask is," he said. The waters slowly began to recede, and I was able to clearly see the objective. "I can do this," I said. And it didn't come from a place of bravado or pride. "JD, he's not asking you to do anything you're not capable of doing." And just like that, what seemed impossible quickly became something I was able to knock out in just a few hours. In that moment, those two helped me to realize the depth of my skill. They made me realize that the potential I didn't always see in myself may well be limitless. We make choices. Every day we make choices, and these choices also include where we work and who we work with. Believe it or not, we get a choice. I know, depending on your situation, you may not think you have a choice, but you do. Like with any relationship, work is just that, another relationship. It can be one that brings out the best in you, or one that slowly kills you from the inside out. It is not uncommon for people to stay in a bad relationship for one reason or another, but you do get a say in who hurts you and for how long. I once had a coworker who was in a very similar situation that I was in, and when I asked them why they were still there, their response, they had built a team and a department from the ground up. They were proud of the work they had accomplished, and even though it was largely going unrecognized, they were proud of what they had done, and they weren't ready to let it go just yet. On the one hand, that made no sense. You can build a team anywhere. But on the other, they had every right to be proud of that team. At any other company, that would be celebrated. But it doesn't always end on such a happy note, does it? Especially in the workplace. But what causes a company to hold on to these people who are riddled with toxicity, who show no capacity to change their behavior?
In medicine, if the cancer stays in, it usually grows and it gets to the point where it kills. So that's the same thing that happens when you tolerate a manager who's toxic. So it becomes a cancer that grows. It permeates to other parts of the company and eventually kills those parts. I have done projects for companies where they've asked me to go in and talk to people that have toxic managers. And as soon as I identify that they are toxic, and I have a general rule, if it's called the horse rule. If one person calls you a horse, disregard it. 2 people call you a horse, think about it. 3 people call you a horse, buy a saddle because you're a horse. So if I hear micromanagement, I hear bullying, I hear all the key words that tell me that this is a toxic manager, I start to say, okay, this is a toxic manager. Then I see, does this person have the ability to change? Normally, very few people have the ability to change that. And unfortunately, a toxic manager in a company that has values shouldn't be there. Even the basic values don't justify that person being there. Trustworthy, kind, loyal, et cetera, they're not living any of those. So why are they there?
The hardest part of all of this is dealing with a situation where good people walk off the job because of toxic leadership, because they're fed up with the behavior of a toxic manager, because they don't feel inspired or supported or respected.
It's easy to let problems linger. It's hard to fire. A lot of people don't like to fire. I often say hire slow, fire fast. The good leaders are the ones that hire people that are better than them. Why? Because they're going to have to do the job. Because leaders are there not for people to report to them. They report to the people. Because if the people don't do the work, then you're not a good leader. I saw something today that I thought was interesting, a quote, and it said, by far the biggest factor in why organizational change fails involves a failure to change human habits. In case after case, everything was right. The strategy, the plans, the budget, and the people were not changing. So the manager that sits on top of Mount Everest and says, you're going to do this now, good luck.
So what do you say to the manager who exhibits these qualities?
They want to be right.
They want to be right. So few words, yet it says so much. So often, toxic managers are so full of pride that their behavior becomes self-destructive. It reminds me of a version of a story of Zeus, Prometheus, and Pandora. According to Greek mythology, Zeus commissioned the creation of a daughter, the Earth's first woman. The world would come to know her as Pandora. She was gifted with beauty and curiosity. Zeus, angry with Prometheus for giving fire to man without his approval, sought to get even. So he sent Pandora a jar called Pythos. She was instructed never to open it under no circumstances. Pandora, being gifted with curiosity, decided to open the jar anyways. Upon opening it, Pandora released all the evil into the world, and not only that, she'd also inadvertently released pain, suffering, strife, disease, and plague into the world as well. She quickly shut the box, but it was too late. All the evils had already escaped. Zeus knew her curiosity would get the best of her. But like all myths, no great event can take place without the scales of good and evil having a chance to balance themselves. In the bottom of the box was a sprite. It was a beautiful creature. And in the midst of her sadness and pain, it brought comfort to Pandora. When Pandora asked the creature what it was, it responded, ever so gently, "Fear not, for I am hope. There are people in the world who will, by most accounts, render unto you utter desolation. And there are also those who will change your life for the better. They will reach down in the depths of the person you are and pull from it a potential uncommon to man in common hours. People like Kalinda and my former CFO and my former divisional president. They will be your greatest allies and your greatest champions. Whilst there will be people who will try and bring you down, these people will lift you up, and while they may not be able to completely save you, they will give you a fighting chance. And just when you're ready to give up on mankind, they will give you hope." My name is JD Hyman. This is the Hyman Podcast. I'll see you next time. This episode of the Hyman Podcast was written, directed, and produced by myself, JD Hyman. Additional research and story development by Whitney Hall, Sherith Guest, and Mary Louise Layton. Kevin Aki developed our branding with additional graphic design by Grant Furness. Jim Yosef produced and mixed our theme song, Canary, with additional music licensed by Epidemic Sound. This episode of the Hyman Podcast was produced in conjunction with the Press Play Podcast Network. Chase Smith serves as CEO. I oversee operations. Brooks May is a Chief Creative Officer. Danny Edgington is Head of Sales, and Michael Sayos is Chief Sound Engineer. To learn more about the network, sponsorships, guest appearances, or if you're interested in launching your own podcast on our network, visit us on the web at www.pressplaypodcast.com. To learn more about this podcast, our mission and vision, as well as your sponsors, please visit us on the web at www.jdhyman.com.